Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are going on an absolutely fascinating micro to macro journey. We're going to trace the breathtaking evolution of human communication, and we're starting right at the beginning, from a baby's very first babbled syllables all the way through those incredibly complicated social rules we navigate as adults, and zooming way out to the complex globalization of the English language. It's a massive shift in scale for sure, but by the end of this, you're going to see exactly how it all connects. Let's get into it. So, here is our roadmap for today. First, acquiring speech and language. Second, politeness in saving face. Third, navigating face-threatening acts. Fourth, cultural linguistics and globalization. And finally, rethinking English language teaching. Let's kick things off with Section 1, acquiring speech and language at the micro level. Now, during the first 0 to 36 months of a child's life, we see the absolute most intensive period for acquiring speech and language skills. The brain is developing so rapidly in these crucial 3 years. We start from a baseline where an infant merely vocalizes pleasure or cries to signal different needs, right? But by 36 months, they are navigating a vocabulary of up to 900 words and actually combining them to form functional sentences. It's wild. And right after that, moving from 3 to 5 years old, the progression is just staggering. A child goes from using simple 3-word sentences to constructing complex 8+ word sentences and doing it grammatically correctly. By the time they hit 5 years old as a new school entrant, they are actively using over 2,000 words. They aren't just naming objects anymore, they're telling stories, they're understanding time sequences, and they are fully engaging in conversation with us. To truly digest the sheer speed of this early language acquisition, we can break it down chronologically. At birth to 5 months, it's just raw vocalizations, pleasure and distress. But then at 6 to 11 months, we get that magical first word. Fast forward just a few months to around the 2-year mark, and boom, the vocabulary explodes from 50 to hundreds of words. By year 5, over 2,000 words. It's an extraordinary biological feat that equips us with the basic toolkit we need to finally enter society. Moving right along to Section 2, politeness and saving face, looking at the interpersonal level. So this brings us to a foundational sociological concept introduced by researchers Penelope Brown and Stephen C. Levinson called face. Now, face is basically the public self-image that every adult member of a society wants to claim for themselves. It is something we are deeply emotionally invested in. It can be lost, it can be maintained, or enhanced. And because social interaction implies a mutual vulnerability, well, we're all constantly working together to maintain our own face and the face of the people we interact with. The crucial point here is contrasting the two distinct desires that actually make up this concept. On one hand, we have positive face. Think of a relatable example from Brown and Levinson's research, like a fervent gardener who spends hours on her roses. Complimenting those beautiful roses totally satisfies her positive face. It's her desire that her wants and personality be admired by others. On the other hand, we have negative face. Now, this isn't negative as in bad. It's simply your basic claim to personal preserves and freedom from imposition. It's that feeling where you just want to be left alone and unimpeded by other people. Which brings us to Section 3, navigating face-threatening acts, or the social obstacles we face. This brings up a really fascinating question. When we just go about our daily lives, how do we actually calculate social risk? How do our brains subconsciously weigh the danger of an interaction? Like asking a friend for a loan or offering criticism to a coworker, before we even open our mouths. What's truly fascinating is that human social anxiety can actually be mapped as a literal mathematical equation. Brown and Levinson argue that the weightiness of a face-threatening act, or FTA, can be computed like this: WX equals D plus P plus R. Basically, every single time you're about to ask for a favor or deliver bad news, your brain is intuitively running this exact formula to figure out exactly how politely you need to speak. Let's systematically break down these 3 sociological variables so you can see how this works. D stands for social distance. Basically, how close are you to this person? Are they a total stranger or your best friend? P is relative power. Are you talking to your boss or someone who reports to you? And R is the absolute ranking of the imposition itself in your specific culture. For example, asking someone for the time is a much lower imposition than asking them for $100, right? By calculating distance, power, and the size of the request, we know intuitively exactly how heavy the social burden is going to be. Once we've calculated that weight, a rational person has to choose a strategy to minimize the threat and preserve social harmony.
You could do the act baldly, which is like yelling, "Watch out," in an emergency, where efficiency completely trumps politeness. You could use positive politeness to emphasize your friendship. You can use negative politeness, leaning heavily on apologies and maintaining a respectful distance. Or, if the risk is just too high, you go off record using hints and metaphors so you can avoid responsibility if things get awkward. Like aggressively hinting that you're thirsty instead of just straight up asking for a sip of water. We've all been there.
All right, moving to Section 4, Cultural Linguistics and Globalization at the Macro Level. Professor Farzad Sharafyan summarized this beautifully when he said, English is no longer the sole property of its so-called native speakers, but it is widely used by speakers from many diverse cultural linguistic backgrounds. Think about that for a second. This represents a massive shift in how we view the English language today. It's no longer just an export from a few countries, it is a shared global resource. This leads us directly to the core of Sharifian's research, cultural conceptualizations. When people around the world learn English, they don't just learn a sterile dictionary. They blend the English language with their own unique ways of construing the world, their own cultural experiences and viewpoints. This means that Chinese English, Malaysian English, or Iranian English all carry distinct, vibrant cultural conceptualizations. They are literally transforming English into a truly multicultural language. And finally, Section 5, Rethinking English Language Teaching and Looking Toward the Future. Professor Sharifian proposed some absolutely vital changes to how we approach English language teaching. First, he suggests abandoning the outdated goal of sole native-like fluency based purely on British or American standards. Instead, we should actively expose learners to a variety of world Englishes. By embracing modern technology and the internet for telecollaboration, students can connect with diverse speakers globally. So the ultimate goal shifts from perfect mimicry to developing what he calls metacultural competence. That's the ability to understand and negotiate cultural differences in real time. And I really want to reiterate why this matters so deeply. Intercultural communication skills must constitute the heart of language proficiency. In our deeply globalized world, if you are doing business across borders or studying abroad, the ability to negotiate intercultural meaning and understand different cultural conceptualizations is infinitely more important than just copying a specific accent. Which leaves us with this final thought for today's explainer. As world Englishes continue to rise, how should you assess language proficiency in your own daily interactions? The next time you speak with someone from a different background, remember this journey. From a child's very first words to the calculus of saving face, right up to global conceptualizations, it fundamentally changes how we listen, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me, and keep exploring.